everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. I'm so glad you could join me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made using the August My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I'm using one of the pattern papers from the kit as a background for my layout, and I'm using some Finnabair clear gesso, and I coat the entire sheet with the gesso. I wanted to protect my background. I'm going to be using some sprays on it. I usually put more than one coat of clear gesso on the background just because I know that I can't see it and I'm afraid that I might have missed a spot or two. After I clean up my workspace a little bit, I grab a frame that was from the kit and I'm using my green dauber and I'm inking the edges of it. I don't use any particular ink color. I just have a green dauber, so whatever ink that was green that was left over on the dauber, that's what I was using to ink up this frame. I have a photo that I took at the New York Botanical Gardens a couple of years ago, and I am putting some adhesive on the back of the frame and mounting my photo behind that frame. The clear gesso that I coated this background with is dry now, and now I'm adding a little bit of white gesso to the area where I want to put the photo. I wasn't sure if it would have an impact as far as lightening up the background, but I just thought that I wanted to have a little bit of white gesso to kind of define the area where I was going to put my sprays. Before I start working on the mixed media in the background, I want to ink the edges of some of these layering pieces and cards and tickets that I'm going to layer behind the photo. To ink the edges of all these pieces, I'm using some distress ink in ground espresso, which is a dark brown color. And I added some of this brown color to the frame, and you can see both the green and the brown when you look carefully at it. Whenever I'm popping up any of my photos or other elements on the page, I like to make sure there is some sturdy paper behind whatever it is I'm popping up. So I'm mounting my photo on some heavy white cardstock, and now I'm going to start layering these pieces behind my photo. Only a little bit of the layering pieces are visible, so in some cases I'm cutting them into pieces so that I can have a little bit of the card or the layering piece on the top and then a little bit showing at the bottom as well. I always like to use a repositionable adhesive whenever possible. I just like that option of being able to move things around, especially after waiting a while. Sometimes I change my mind about things. This is a time that I really like that option because I think that just slight little changes in how things are positioned can make such a big difference in the whole look of the cluster. I'm trying to strike a balance between having lots of layers and not overdoing it. I want the cluster to be interesting, but I don't want to have too many papers behind the photo either. I ripped that yellow card to add a little bit of variety to the edges of the paper. And then once again, I cut it into pieces and put a little piece on one side and another piece on the other side. It wouldn't have been long enough to stretch behind the whole photo cluster. I'm not quite done with the photo cluster, but I thought that I would start thinking about the other elements on the page. I fussy cut 3 butterflies from one of the ephemera pieces that was included in the kit, and I'm inking the edges again with the ground espresso, and I'm again using whatever ink is on the dauber. I put the butterflies aside for a moment because I wanted to put some mixed media in the background. I'm just roughly marking with my pencil where the photo is going to be, and I'm going to start off by doing some stamping in the background. I'm using some Staz On ink in jet black and a Prima stamp that we got in a previous My Creative Scrapbook kit, and I'm stamping all around where I'm going to have the frame and the photo cluster. My plan is to add some sprays in this area as well, and this is kind of an experiment for me because I'm used to having a lot more embellishing on my pages, but I just saw these papers and these layering pieces and I thought that I would like to highlight those and have kind of a minimalist layout, so that's what I'm trying. And I can't say that this is the first time that I have attempted to make a layout like this, but what usually happens is I get carried away and there are sprays and there's stamping all over the background. But in this case, I was able to keep the stamping and the mixed media in the background contained to a small area around the cluster. To add some color to the background, I'm using a Lindy's Starburst spray, and the name of it is Alpine Ice Rose. I'm also using this sprayer. This is, I believe, meant mainly for alcohol ink, and I'm going to just create a small spray of color underneath the photo cluster. This tool is made by Ranger. I purchased it in Michael's a while back. I was thinking that I would use the tool and I would create like a dripping effect underneath the photo. Because I have gesso on the page, I was able to add a large area of color. I added a little bit of water and then use this tool and push the color across the paper. Whether you use white gesso or clear gesso, the gesso creates a layer between the paper and whatever sprays or other mixed media you put on top of the paper, so that instead of just soaking into the paper, the gesso will prevent that and it keeps the liquid on the surface, and then that allows you to move it around a little bit. First, I put the drips where I wanted them to go. I do end up extending the drips over to the left a little bit, or the right when it's turned right side up. I knew from past experience that one coat of the spray isn't enough to make the impact that I wanted to make. So once I used this tool and I got all the drips where I wanted them, I went back and I added another layer of color. There's two ways of doing that. You can either add the color and then use the sprayer again, and then the color will tend to go where the paper is already wet. And then in other cases, I use a small paintbrush and I just went ahead in and painted those drips so that they looked a little bit darker. And you can see here I'm adding the second coat of the sprays to the top. I always feel that at least 2 coats makes the color look deeper and richer. And it's not necessarily 2 even coats. I want there to be some areas that only got 1 coat and some areas that get 2. And then I also added some splatters on the top as well. And again, because the gesso is there, I was able to fix a drip that I didn't like the look of. Here you'll be able to see what I was talking about earlier, how when you put down color and you spray it and you've already created drips in those areas, the color will tend to go in those same areas, which is very handy for building up the layers of color. Although that will only work if the initial drips are still wet. If they're dry, then the color will go in new places if you add more color. Now, usually I don't cut out footage of mixed media just because I know from my own experience when somebody makes a mixed media background, I like to see the whole thing. But this goes on for quite a while. I do cut out some of the footage, but I continue to do the exact same thing. I put down color, I use the sprayer tool and I spread it around, and then I use the paintbrush in some places, and my whole goal here is to build up the layers and have a deep, rich color. Then I use my paintbrush and I add some splatters to the background. I always like to add the splatters all over the area of color, but I always think that they look nice right along the edge so that there is some transition from the big area of color into the background. Now that I have the color down, I wanted to add a little bit more stamping. Off camera, I dried the whole background before adding any stamping because I wanted to make sure that it was dry before attempting to add any ink. Next, I'm adding some black splatters to the background. This is watered down black acrylic paint, and I am trying to once again add the splatters right over and around this large area of color that I just created. I find that tapping the scissors against the top area of the sprayer helps to make very, very tiny splatters. And then when I hit it with my finger, the splatters are a little bit larger. Now I'm adding some white splatters, and both the black and the white splatters are watered down acrylic paint. I generally add more white splatters than black splatters. I'm not really sure why I do that, but I guess I figure you can never add enough white splatters because they are not as visible as the black ones. And if I don't get the black splatters exactly where I want them, I do sometimes go in with a marker, or I will sometimes dot them on with the tip of the straw, because sometimes you just need splatters in a particular spot and it just doesn't work out, or I find that anyway. I wanted to mention that before I added the acrylic paint splatters, I ran the background through my laminator to help flatten it out. Here I'm using some Distress ink, this time in walnut stain, and I'm inking the edges of a number of embellishments that I am considering putting on the layout. And I absolutely love those mushrooms. There were a lot of mushrooms in the kit this month, and I think they're awesome. So of course I had to add a little something more to the background before adding all of my embellishments and my photo cluster on it. This time I'm using another stamp. This one was in my stash. This is a grid stamp, and I'm just adding little touches of it to the area of color on the layout. I added a little more ink to the photo cluster, and then once I put the photo cluster down on the layout, I found another spot that I wanted to add some stamping to, and here I'm using a Sharpie and I'm adding a couple of black dots in a few places that I thought the black dots were needed. I wanted to add some dimension to the layout, so I'm using some fun foam to pop up the photo cluster. The fun foam just adds a very small amount of dimension, so I know some people don't really like to add a lot of dimension to their layouts, but it just adds enough to highlight or emphasize that area of your layout. It doesn't make the pages particularly thick. And then after I have the foam on the back of the photo cluster, I add ATG adhesive and I attach down the photo. I have these butterflies that I'm going to put in the upper right hand and the lower left hand side of the photo. Now I'm going to be using this round tag that says Nature Lover on it as my title. On the right hand side of the frame, I layer a couple of mushrooms, and I like the way the yellow in the mushrooms goes with the yellow that's in the photo. I also add a sentiment that says Discover the Good Life, and I pop that up on a little bit of foam as well. Put that right underneath the photo. And I always like to pop up the butterflies on some foam. I always want to make sure that they have dimension. So I'm adding some fun foam to the back of them. On the bottom left-hand side, I'm only putting fun foam on the left-hand side of the butterfly because the right-hand side is resting on the photo cluster. And then I do the same thing to the title. I pop that up, but only on the left-hand side. And then I attach the large mushroom right down to the frame, but I wanted to pop up the smaller mushroom that I'm going to have layered on top of it. So once again, I add a little bit of fun foam and layer that in there. And then this smaller mushroom that's going to go right behind the bigger one. Now that I have the photo cluster in place, I had a chance to look at the whole layout, and I felt that a little more stamping was needed on the right hand side of the layout, so I started adding a little bit more stamping in a couple of places. Once I got started, I decided that I wanted to add a little stamping in the area underneath the photo. I just thought that it would look good to have a couple of stamps over the drips, otherwise the drips would kind of stand out as the only area of pink that didn't have any stamping on them. I thought that the green ticket on the top would help to balance out that whole cluster. And I wanted to add a little bit of twine through the Nature Lover tag. So I used some black and off-white twine that I had in my stash. I tied a bow and then cut it down to size. Now I'm using some foam and I am covering up my photo so it doesn't get splatters on it, but I wanted to add a few more white splatters both in the background and also on the embellishments. And then I got a little bit of paint on the title, but I was able to quickly just rub that off. Usually the splatters go all over and it's not a problem, but every once in a while splatters end up where I don't want them, and if I rub them off quickly enough, they don't seem to be a problem. I fussy cut out a whole bunch of butterflies for another layout, and I was thinking that these butterflies might look just a little bit better on the layout just because they have a lot of white in them and they're a little brighter, so I decided to replace them, and I do think that these butterflies go a little bit better with this layout. And then I am trying to be a little bit more of a minimalist, but it's a little hard for me. So I was thinking that I would add a little cutout on the left-hand side and put some pattern paper behind it. So I roughly drew with my pencil the area I wanted to cut out. I cut it out with my scissors. I distressed the edges, and then I cut a piece of the pattern paper that was in the kit, and I attached that behind the layout. And I was really happy with that addition. I think that it just kind of helps to balance the layout out a little bit. And then I was thinking it would look nice to add a little something to that area. Not a lot, because like I said, I wanted to have a little bit more of a minimalist layout here. But I did think that one small butterfly would be a good addition. So I fussy cut it out, I added some foam, and then I attached it by that cutout, and that completes this layout. And here are some close-ups. Thank you very much for taking your time today to watch this video, everybody. I really hope that you enjoyed it. In the description box, you'll find a link to the My Creative Scrapbook website. You can check out the limited edition kit. That's what I used to make this layout. And there are also 3 other fantastic kits, and you can see this month's kit, and if you like, you can subscribe. I hope that everybody has a fantastic day. I will be back again soon with another video. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.